Okay. Buenos días. I can see that todos son españoles aquí. No, un francés también. Sí, okay. Bien. Muy bien. Es una solidaridad con ponentes. Bien. So, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I would like to welcome you at this presentation of a study addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict titled Prospects of Reinvigorating the Middle East Peace Process, a possible joint EU-US undertaking. The study was requested by the IEMed Committee and commissioned by the Policy Department for External Policies to the Center for Social and Economic Research in Poland, which won a tender with their offer. Just to be transparent. The study has been written by a team of 4 main authors. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Emmanuel Cohen-Hadria, from the European Institute of the Mediterranean in Barcelona and Girona in Spain, or Girona in Spain.
La calle is Girona.
Okay. Where he is director of the Euro-Mediterranean Policies Department. Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project in the United Kingdom, who is also present with us in the room. Zaha Hassan, fellow in the Middle East program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in the United States, connected online. And lastly, Katarzyna Sidło, project coordinator, director of the Middle East and North Africa Department at the Center for Social and Economic Research in Warsaw, Poland, who was not available today due to the personal family commitments. The study has been made available to members on 13th of January and is published on Parliament website. You will also find physical copies here in the room, just at the entrance. The paper was written between July and November last year. A few technical remarks before we start. I would like to note that this meeting is taking place in a physical presence only, except for expert Zaha Hassan connected remotely. The interested public can follow the meeting via web streaming on EP Live. Our meeting takes place only in English without interpretation. Should members wish to speak in the Q&A following the presentation, please make your request known to me or the Secretariat. With these preliminary remarks, we can begin addressing the essence of the matter. Allow me to share the background of the IEMed request for this study first. In 2020, the previous US administration promoted a peace plan called Peace to Prosperity, which recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and brokered the Abraham Accords, normalizing Israel's relations with a number of Arab states. There was and still is a palpable feeling that a new political dynamic is developing in the region, requiring EU reaction, if not active EU involvement. We had also seen a certain level of hope raised for more open stance from the previous Israeli government. This hope was reinforced by expectation of the Palestinian side finally managing to organize elections delayed for so long. As the US considers a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of vital importance, this committee wished to explore and assess the political, security, socio-economic and other preconditions that could lead to such a goal. The intended focus was to look at options for EU support potentially in a joint fashion with the current US administration. Since IEMed's request was made, Israel elected a new government that has yet to show commitment to a peaceful solution. And unfortunately, Palestinian elections seems to be still a distant wish. As a result, the prospects do not seem to be hopeful today. However, the EU must remain committed in words and actions alike, rooted in its values. There is no alternative to negotiated two-state solutions, with two sovereign and democratic states living together in peace. This study complements ongoing work in the form of previous reports and exchanges of views undertaken in AFET or standing delegations or plenary. At the end of the last year, 2 resolutions with relevance to the Middle East peace process were adopted in the plenary. Currently, a recommendation on Palestine drafted by Evin Inchir is considered in AFET. It was presented on Monday. Finally, AFET holds regular exchanges with all relevant counterparts in the Commission and External Action Service. We will therefore listen with great interest to the policy options, scenarios and recommendations in support of the peace plan presented today by the study's authors. I would now like to give the floor to the speakers for a total of about 15 minutes in total, which you can be divided between yourselves as deemed fit. The floor is yours. So I will give the floor to Emmanuel Cohen-Hadria.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and through you, thanks to the AFET committee for having us. Thanks also to the colleagues from the Policy Department and from the AFET Secretariat for making this possible, for an excellent cooperation over the last months as well. We have little time indeed, so let me skip the introduction. I would just like to thank very much Katarzyna, Sidło, the 4th author of our team indeed, that did a splendid job in coordinating our team with Zaha, Hassan, as you said, Chair, and Daniel Levy, who is here with myself today. Thanks to Marek and the extended support team, including Oscar, who is in the room, Delia and Justine. Okay, so I'll start indeed straight now with a few takeaways on the EU's role and on EU-US cooperation before Zaha and Daniel continue. Sorry if I go for a bit of a telegraphic presentation given the format of our event. So when you talk to EU policymakers involved in that part of the world in particular, I think there are 3 songs you get quite recurrently, quite consistently. One is like, look how impressive it is that we managed to remain united around our parameters. The second would go like this. It's a bit less enthusiastic. The EU is a marginal player. There is not much we can do without the US, really. And the third one is that moving away from EU's current position is too difficult, is too costly. What we do in this report, and what I will do in the 8-9 quick points I will make now, is that we question, we challenge these 3 attitudes. My first point is that EU's impact on the Middle East peace process has further diminished over the last years. Priding oneself to remain loyal to parameters does not mean much if EU's actions are not consequential with those parameters. And it's more, if EU's normative power has waned in recent years, it is also because it has not evolved and adapted to new circumstances on the ground. In other words, to close the gap between, again, a constant EU position and a situation that has deteriorated. Second point, it's not only about being consequential or not being consequential with parameters. It's also about the trend of untying EU-Israeli and EU-Palestinian relations from EU's commitment to the Middle East peace process. And ultimately, it's also about letting the Middle East peace process disappear from EU's agenda. Third point, instead of thinking about processes, about frameworks, what we could do with the US now that the quartet is de facto dead, we think the EU should first redirect its energy towards redefining its own approach in an independent manner. And that it's more, we think that new approach could become the flagship of EU's quest to be more geopolitical, more sovereign. And let's make no mistake when I say being, what does it mean being geopolitical in that sense? Being geopolitical means understanding well the fallout of the war in Ukraine, understanding that the future of EU foreign policy is not only written in Ukraine, but would be better served by consistency and by bold moves in other theaters as well. Fourth, EU's limited clout results to a large extent from structural characteristics of EU foreign policy, in particular, but not only from its reliance on unanimity. 5, if the design flaws of EU's foreign policy cannot be addressed in the short term, and if common action on an EU level are not feasible, like-minded member states should come together to define a more ambitious approach towards the Middle East peace process without being concerned with breaking the semblance of EU's unity. 6, the EU has a lot to lose in maintaining its current approach. It has a lot to lose in the status quo in terms of the consequences of a possible upsurge of violence, in terms of the cost of further eradication of its influence over the Middle East peace process, and in terms of undermining the legitimacy of its foreign policy as a whole. 7, on EU-US cooperation, more specifically, the current division of labor between the EU and the US on that file is asymmetrical. It's not favorable to the European Union. The US is not fundamentally interested in closer cooperation with the EU on the Middle East peace process. There may be some lip service to some EU's initiatives, but despite this lip service, the EU is likely to continue to dismiss the EU and act unilaterally, in particular in case of a surge of violence. 8, and I'm getting close to the end, the difference between the EU and the USA in terms of methods, in terms of priorities, in terms of position, has become less obvious over the last years. The bottom line for the US is that the Middle East peace process continues to be secondary, independent to its relations with Israel, which is not where the EU is coming from historically, but it's clearly the trends. And the last point would be the recommendations in terms of EU-US cooperation that flow from this. Again, the EU should be, as I said already, more inward-looking and focus on redefining its position. Too, and Daniel or Zaha may elaborate on this. EU should hold off on participation in the US funding mechanism under the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act until it can be assured that strict differentiation will be applied to grants under the fund. And then to finish, I think still the EU hasn't really learned the lessons from the Trump administration. Although we argue that the differences between the American administrations are not so big, the EU was bullied, ignored, and divided as ever under the Trump presidency, and I think it should draw the lesson from this in case that is bound to happen again. So I leave the floor now to Zaha to continue with her points. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we are, as I have in my agenda, we have.
I think they want to change.
So you want to change it? Okay. So we have Madame Zaha Hassan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to members of the committee for hosting us today. I also want to echo my colleague Emmanuel and uplifting Katarzyna for her tremendous effort and seeing this study to its final conclusion with you all today. I'm going to speak today about politics and how the EU should approach that dysfunction. And I'm going to talk a bit about EU relations with Palestinians and the U.S. relationship, the bilateral relationship to Palestinians. First, on the internal Palestinian political scene. The current internal landscape is a deeply fractured one, geographically, generationally, and even at the intra-party level. This is especially true for the Fatah Party, which is the ruling party of the Palestinian Authority. Gaza and the West Bank have been divided between the Hamas Authority and the Fatah-led PA leadership since 2007, when the two political factions failed to come to an agreement on how to share power. After Hamas won the PA legislative elections, these were the last PA elections to be had. And over the last 2 years in particular, we've seen the PA lose control over much of the West Bank. Breakaway Fatah militias and young Palestinians are joining with other factions in attacks against Israel. And in order to defend their communities from Israeli raids that have become a daily and nightly occurrence since early 2022. In fact, last year was the deadliest year in the West Bank since the second Intifada ended in 2005. Today, the majority of Palestinians see the PA as a burden. Though Palestinians showed great enthusiasm for the holding of PA legislative elections, registering to vote at a rate of 93%, the Fatah-led PA reneged on holding elections in 2021 when the Fatah list split 5 ways, and it looked like the Fatah leadership would not be able to guarantee its pick as a successor to the chairmanship of the party. The popular disaffection with the aging party leadership within Fatah is also why the party chairman, Mahmoud Abbas, keeps postponing the convening of the Fatah Congress. Neither Hamas nor the Fatah-led PA has any incentive to share power in a government of national consensus that would also allow Hamas to come under the PLO umbrella, such as was agreed most recently in Algeria. So in order to end the stalemate and allow the PA to take administration over Gaza, there will have to be international intervention, particularly from the EU and the US. The PA will require commitments that it will not be blamed for any violations of the reconciliation agreement stemming from Hamas's actions. And Fatah will also want resumption of its administration in Gaza to be linked to a political process with Israel and substantial donor support toward the rehabilitation of Gaza, as well as increased support for the West Bank, so as not to uplift Hamas at the expense of Fatah's base in the West Bank, where the PA leadership is already deeply unpopular. To facilitate this, the EU and the US would also have to review their no-contact policy against Hamas, which should be based on Hamas's commitment to refraining from political violence targeting civilians. EU and the U.S. would also have to bring Israel along in this, which is no, short order. Now, as to EU-Palestinian relations, Europe's traditional role has been one in which it set the trends for engagement on Middle East peace matters. European states and bodies were the first to openly engage with and then recognize the PLO as the legitimate representative of Palestinians. And they were the first to endorse Palestinian autonomy and later the call for Palestinian statehood in 1999, all years before the United States did any of those things. However, the EU's secondary position on Middle East peace vis-a-vis the U.S. became firmly established with its participation in the Middle East Quartet in 2002. Though a co-equal within the quartet with the U.S., Russia, and the UN, the EU began to defer to the U.S. more regularly. A year after it joined the quartet, the EU designated the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas as a terrorist organization, following suit with the U.S., which designated Hamas in 1997, so that when Hamas won PA legislative elections in 2006, the EU, like the U.S., instituted that no-contact policy against the Hamas-led PA government, effectively penalizing Palestinians for their democratic choice and hamstringing EU engagement on Middle East peace. That no-contact policy remains in place today against Hamas in Gaza, despite Hamas's revisions to its charter and its stated willingness to accept the two-state solution and the PLO as the Palestinian interlocutor. With respect to economic assistance to the Palestinian people, the EU's policy has remained consistent in providing financial and technical support to the civil society and to the PA government in the West Bank. But what we're left with today is EU declarative
Madam Hassan,
statements in support
in
of
order to
international law.
let the third speak, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you down now and later on put you on to answer the questions. Thank you. So,
Sure, I apologize.
No, that's okay. Thank you. And now we have Daniel Levy, please.
Zaha, I hope we hear more from you later. Let me thank the thank the committee for commissioning this study and for giving us the opportunity to be with you today. Let me also clear my throat, that's better. It's a long study, but if I were to distill this down into a key point to share with you, which isn't to discourage reading the full study, it would be this. If Europe is serious about Article 2 of its own treaty regarding human rights, if it wants to be taken seriously by the rest of the world as a normative actor standing for international law, for a rules-based international order, if it wants to have traction in that respect with much of the rest of the world, that looks at the position on Ukraine and then looks at the position elsewhere and sees the Palestine-Israel situation as Exhibit A in double standards. If it wants to have that traction and win over the middle ground in the global south, then it has to act with consistency on a most egregious violation of international law. Let us be very clear, the situation is grave. The violations of Palestinian basic rights, human rights of international law take place every day. There is a permanent occupation and dispossession of Palestinians. There is structural inequality within Israel, and it is all well documented. And it has reached such a stage that not only Palestinian NGOs, but the leading Israeli NGOs, such as B'Tselem, and the leading international blue chip followers of these issues, which are quoted in all kinds of contexts as respectable sources, as well they should be, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have come to a point where they have made a designation that a regime of apartheid prevails vis-à-vis Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. It's bad, and it gets worse. Unfortunately, the new government of Israel has been explicit in committing to entrenching this reality, preventing Palestinian statehood. And here's the key that we want to highlight. Impunity is the handmaiden to extremism. All of what we see is possible because the country acting in violation of international law is not held accountable. And therefore there is a choice for Europe, for this body. And the choice is whether to insulate its bilateral relations with Israel from Israel's illegal actions, or whether those are placed front and center of that bilateral relationship. Obviously, the path that has been chosen is the former. That leads to complicity in these human rights violations, and that means that Europe, unfortunately, has no standing in advancing peace or deoccupation. When it comes to the relationship with the US on this, I fail to understand the value in placing oneself in the slipstream of a vehicle that is paralyzed and stuck, which is where Europe has placed itself. This isn't to say this becomes a fight between Europe and America, but it is to say that if Europe acts in accordance with commonly held values, I think it will gain more respect on this file from the US and be taken more seriously. We have heard about the measures vis-à-vis the Palestinians, and hopefully we will hear about that more. And so I would make two final points because I'm conscious of time. One of those is I hear talk that perhaps the way to make a qualitative difference is to work on this advancing of normalization and the Abraham Accords file. Let's be clear, those accords are about a lot of things, but they are not about peace. The parties to those accords were not in conflict. This is about marginalizing the Palestinian situation, not advancing any peace with the Palestinians. And so I find a recent announcement by Commissioner Varhelyi to make available funding to support this activity one of the more perplexing suggestions as to how European taxpayer money can be best utilized. And let me say one more thing on a perhaps more personal note, as we're just coming up to Holocaust Remembrance Day, and as a proud Jew, and as someone who comes from a family of survivors of that event. I can understand the state of Israel having a statecraft interest in talking about anti-Semitism in a way that can further insulate Israel from being held to account. I can understand how advocates of the cause of Israel would like to seize on that piece of framing. I do not understand how those who are genuinely concerned about a worrying rise and trend, an increase in anti-Semitism, think that it is a good idea to indulge in a conflation of what is legitimate criticism and to allow and encourage this misuse of the very serious accusation of anti-Semitism in order to silence not only Palestinian and Arab voices, sometimes to silence Jewish voices, to sow division between communities, to make the suggestion that following international law and using international law to make a designation of apartheid, to make the suggestion that that or sanctions for violating international law are somehow based on an animus towards Jewish people, I find insulting and inappropriate, irresponsible political behavior. Let me close with that thought.
Right. Thank you very much. Now we have heard the speakers. I'm afraid I still haven't read the study. I hope that the study will be more equidistant in this approach than what we have heard. Now I'm taking the head of the vice chair, and as we don't have any EPP member of the parliament here, as the EPP member I can just strongly object to what was being said, because we have not presented the other side of the issue in this study, and this is something that should be taken into consideration. Last week in Strasbourg, I presented the book written by Ari Mittel on righteous people, and the anti-Semitist attacks that are increasing in Europe and in the United States are calling for the really equidistant approach to this problem. Thank you very much. So, as I said, I strongly voiced my reserves towards this expose, because I think that European Union, in order to be taken seriously and to use preventive diplomacy, has to have an unbiased approach to all sides in all the conflicting issues. And now I will pass the floor to Elvir Incir, who is rapporteur for the new report on the Palestine state.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks also to our guest. I think it's not surprising that I, on my other hand, would like to subscribe to actually what was just said, because in the end, the root of why it doesn't go forward is the occupation and lack of leadership globally by the EU, by the US, and with the Trump, the US leaving a vacuum was never filled by the European Union, and not either the new leadership, unfortunately, of US, even though there were a lot of hopes that there might be change to it and some progress with Joe Biden, but nevertheless. And we have also, it is, I think, important to highlight that in our own Article 2 of the EU-Israeli Association Agreement says that if none of the sides, that means Israel and EU, do not respect international law and the principles, well, that could actually constitute constitute to the abolishment of the agreement. And I think, of course, dialogues and agreements are important, but as well is the respect for international law. Very wisely, I also think the situation of Ukraine was addressed. International law are universal. They are not cherry picking, and they are not to be applied in some circumstances on others. So both Israel and Palestine have the responsibility to contribute, of course, to the progress of the Middle East peace process. But the accountability the accountability part, I feel, is more addressed on the case of Palestinians than on Israelis. If we should be credible on this, we need to demand that both sides take their share of responsibility and live up to their commitments. I actually have one very concrete question to the speakers, and I need to unfortunately leave in 2-3 minutes. I have another meeting. But my very concrete question is, with the new government in Israel, what are the possibilities for any kind of improvement when it comes to the progress of Middle East peace process, also with EU, if EU decides to take leadership even in it? Thank you.
Right, thank you. And now we have Madame Rodriguez Ramos.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation of this study. I think it shows a reality that unfortunately it's very difficult to debate in this parliament. It is difficult for me to understand the exceptionality on the presentation of this study. Like in other topics, I think this debate should have taken place within the agenda of our ordinary meetings, NAFEC committee meetings, including also interpretation. It's my right to express me in my language. But okay, in this study, no? And honestly, this is not a coincidence. I think it is an intentionality. In other order of the things, I think this study is an excellent work, and it would have been a very interesting element for the resolution that we approved in December's plenary session. But in any case, it would be an interesting contribution for our report of recommendations to the Palestinian authorities, in which we are now working. 3 questions. In relation in your study, you recommended regarding the European Parliament is for the special representative to involve the Parliament in the Friends on MEPP initiative. What specifically does this initiative entail, and how could the Parliament contribute to it, especially given the difficulty for this Parliament to find common position and actions to contribute the enforcement of international law on Israel. In the last resolution on two-state solution calls for the establishment of an European peace initiative. However, this is maybe a bit too abstract. How do you think this could be implemented in practical terms? How could the European Parliament support this process? And finally, since 2016, Israel has destroyed EU-funded structures in the West Bank and East Jerusalem worth almost 3 million euros. Lenarki, the Commissioner Lenarki, recently admitted in response to a parliamentary question that the EU, that at this stage, at least of possible option to secure compensation for the Israel demolition has not been discussed, I finalize. On a study, you suggest the creation of a mechanisms. What more concrete measures could be put in place in this framework of this mechanism to stop the destruction? Thank you, thank you, and congratulations for your work.
Thank you, Madam Rodriguez Rames. So from the Liberals, we have two.
Greens.
Now we have a green group, Jordi Soler, and then Mr. Javier Nart from the Liberal Renew.
Ay, no, perdona. Ahora sí, ¿no?
Yes. Bueno, lo perdono. This is solved. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks very much to the authors for your interventions. I have to say that I still have to go through the whole report, the whole document. I only started yesterday night, but I could only read a couple of pages. But I listened very attentively to your remarks, and I can only say that I completely share what I think, what you say is the main message of this report, which is the EU needs to go its own way when dealing with the conflict between Israel and Palestine, that the EU needs to be consistent in what we do and what we say when it comes to respect to international law, when it comes to denouncing violations of human rights, because we all know all this is happening in the context of this long-standing conflict, and it's also about strategic autonomy or strategic sovereignty of the European Union. We all like to speak about the need to increase the role of the European Union in the world, the impact that we can have, but especially we need to have an impact on our neighborhood. And this is about our southern neighborhood. We have our own interest in trying to be helpful in order to solve this conflict. And we have to have this strategic approach, which I think, particularly me, I am missing from the European Union. And that's why we passed a resolution last December in the plenary on the perspectives on the conflict. And one of the key demands addressed to the High Representative was, please lead an European initiative, an European peace initiative, where Europe can show a bigger commitment towards peace between Israel and Palestine. Having said that, I wanted to ask our guests two issues. First of all, I agree with the fact that the EU needs to be more involved, more directly involved with our own agenda. But besides the US, we've seen how they are losing real interest in the region as a whole, and specifically in solving this conflict. Aside from the US, who else do you think? Who else should make an effort in order to try to bring both sides again on the negotiation table and achieve peace? Maybe the Arab world, or is the Arab world too divided on this issue? There was the Arab Peace Initiative some 20 years ago, but it seems also to have been quite forgotten. What do you think could be the role of other actors, especially the Arab world, in this renewed interest for peace? And secondly, as it was mentioned, we are preparing a report on relations between the EU and the Palestinian Authority under the lead of Madam Inchir. And I think it would be very interesting for us, I'm shadowing it for my group, to know your views on how the European Union should approach, should manage its relations with the PA, especially when it comes to financing the PA, to helping improve governance in the occupied Palestinian territories, also the relations and the funding to civil society. So I would be interested in knowing your ideas on how these relations between the EU and the Palestinian Authority should be for the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to the other Renew speaker, Monsieur Javier Nart.
Congratulations for the text. It's not good or bad, it's just factual. That's good enough. When I hear about anti-Semitism, and I see that there is Daniel Levy and Emmanuel Cohen, it looks like, let me say, an excuse not to go to the point. There is an interesting book that I really recommend to anyone that thinks that, not criticizing, but pointing the same law, the same level to any country, including Israel. It is anti-Semitism. The book is The Holocaust is Over. Let us build from its ashes. And the person that wrote it is a person that is called Abraham Burg, that is one of the few that could survive from the Holocaust. And he was the former president of the Knesset. So please, I don't want to despise people that were killed in the Holocaust and them to be an excuse for horrible crimes in any place, because the one who committed it is Israel. Second, if we think that annexation is good, then let us condone Russia because of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Mariupol, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. So annexation, it is a crime in accordance with any standard. And Israel has annexed territories. Second, colonization is a crime for an occupying country in accordance with any international level. Even in the Spanish criminal code, it is 10 years of imprisonment if Spain, any minister, accepts to colonize any territory out of Spain. So if we do think that it's not a crime to shell a country that is under your own occupation with weapons, and it is of course a crime, then why we are blaming Russia for doing what they are doing? This is a double standard that is vomiting, excuse me. If we accept what is doing, colonization and annexation, then please, we have to clap and to give our best wishes to Russia because of Ukraine. So my problem is not the flag. The problem is the point. Then let's go for the situation. First, the policy of Israel from 1967, it is annexation and colonization. It didn't happen with the horrible governments of the extreme right. It happened with the governments of the left. And so I even remember a conversation that I had with Shlomo Ben-Ami, that was the former Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I said to him, well, you look that you are very peaceful, but you have doubled the colonization in the territories under Barak regime. It is labor government. If we see what is happening today, that is colonization, that it is a crime in accordance with international law, and if we see just the map of Palestine, that is a leopard skin with dots here and there, that they are the small Bantustans of Palestinians. And if we realize that it's not only the land, much more water is the water. The aquifers, they are mostly in the West Bank, and they have been taken by the system of Israel that is the Mechorot. And so they take the water from Palestine and they diverse it to Israel. This is a crime in accordance with international law. Crime. It's not good or bad. It is a crime. It's against the Fourth Geneva Convention. Colonization, taking the resources, annexation. So this is pure factual. And then we go to the point. Israel is in the way of annexing the territory from 1967 to today. And European Union, what we have said is only words, empty words, and nothing more. United States, for the United States, Israel is an internal affair. It's not an external one. So what is doing the United States is condoning and condoning and condoning. And what we are doing at the European Parliament is just crying crocodiles' tears because we are so worried about what happened in shelling in Gaza or what we are doing in the annexation of Palestine. But we do nothing, and we have heard Article 2. If we apply Article 2 to any of our agreements, then we have to apply it to Israel. If we don't apply it, we'll erase it. I am ready to say this is a cynical clause because we never put it in order. And about the Palestinian Authority, it is a shame. Palestinians, they have two problems, Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And then we are accepting Mahmoud Abbas as the legal representative of Palestine when he's out of his own presidency more than 10 years ago. So European Union is a shame what we are doing that is doing nothing. Sometimes we make a resolution saying we are for the two-state solution. But in fact we are not, because we are not implementing our possibilities. Israel is a European country with education, culture, and even history because they come from Europe. And so we have a leverage on Israel that is commercial and educational and scientific ties, but we don't apply to them. Frankly speaking, sometimes when I have to condemn Russia because the aggression in Ukraine, I feel badly because I say I have a different approach, European Parliament, to what happens in some places that we condone and what happens in others in the same kind, annexation, colonization, and then we condemn Russia, but we don't do it with Israel.
Sorry, Mr. Nat, we have to finish because...
Yes, I already finished. Let me read something.
We just have 5 minutes for the answers. We don't have... I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But this is a question of Marcus, it's not mine.
No, but you just overdid your time. I mean, if we want to give our speakers time to answer, please do allow them. Thank you. Thank you so much. So in which order would you like to take the floor? Madam Zaha Hassan first. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'll just address a few of them and let my colleagues address others.
5 minutes altogether.
In terms of, I'll just start with the last comment about sort of water in Palestine and the issue of expropriation of natural resources. I want to just amplify what was said by my colleagues around the efforts for regional economic integration of Israel and the focus on developing, solutions to climate change and water scarcity in the
Zaha,
region.
just to let you know, they're going to close us in 5 minutes.
Okay. I just wanted to make the point that the issue of water is a central focus of these regional integration initiatives that leave Palestinians out at the end of the day and end up entrenching Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank because Palestinians aren't involved and their rights aren't respected in those agreements. In terms of Palestinian civil society and ways to support them, this is an area where the EU does have some influence over the Palestinian Authority in terms of, encouraging them to allow elections and encouraging the revitalization of Palestinian national institutions and to allow Palestinian civil society to act unhindered by the authorities. And I'll just stop there.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Daniel Levy.
Just on the a peace initiative, I think sometimes there's not ripeness for a peace initiative to bring the parties together, especially when there is such an asymmetry of power and one party feels it can get away with anything. And so sometimes what a peace initiative looks like is to create the ripeness for a potential future settlement. And creating that ripeness is all about this issue of accountability. It's all about what position do you take on the database of settlements at the Human Rights Council in Geneva? What position do you take on differentiation? What position do you take on conditioning the bilateral relationship and advancing that bilateral relationship on the treatment of the Palestinians? What position does one take on the ICC, the ICJ? To be consistent, as we have heard from others, across the board. And how does one help stand up Palestinian political renewal, which is what Zaha was speaking to, including defending human rights defenders and defending the shrinking space for Palestinian civil society. And as was mentioned, it's not that there's such a change with this new government. It was the previous government that closed down 6 Palestinian NGOs, the previous Israeli government. So that comes into the question of what to do with this relationship with the PA paper. What I would just say on that is I think it is unconscionable to consider introducing conditionality in that bilateral relationship, but continuing as is in the bilateral relationship with the occupying power. Let us never substitute equidistant thinking for a recognition that there is an occupying power and an occupied people. And while I am not so naive as to delude myself that this study or this conversation may change the course of history or the approach of this chamber, I am somewhat more confident that history will record who stood on the side of justice and who defended apartheid in the 21st century. Or maybe the people who are defending apartheid would call it equidistance. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And finally, we have Emmanuel Cohen-Hadria.
We know Member Rodriguez said that it was a difficult debate in this House and in other institutions, and that you regretted that this debate was not happening in other places. This is actually something we point out in the report, that it is out of fear of exposing divisions that this debate is not brought not only in this House, but to the PSC or to some working groups of the Council. So we actually think that it is this fear of exposing divisions should be overcome. So that's one of the things we say. And by the way, Friends of the Middle East Peace Process is a good initiative to try, led by the USR, to try to remobilize DGs of the European Commission, different services around the Middle East peace process. It should maybe, the work should result in a list of what could be done in order to address annexation in a more forceful manner. And we do think indeed that the European Parliament should be involved. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So I would now like to close the debate. I hope that today's presentation and debate with our distinguished guests provided us with a deeper understanding and the complex and binding road ahead to peace between Israel and Palestine and the potential role for the EU and US. Thank you very much for the members' presence, colleagues, staff, and in particular, thank you for the authors of the study that gave us one view on the approach to this issue, how European Union could take a position. Thank you.
Thank you.